Hello there, and a very warm welcome to Journey Journals by Life of Gaia. My name is Gaia, and this is a channel, as always, where we explore journeys into the unknown to discover ourselves. Now, my guest today is a very, very dear friend, Cesar Rodriguez. Welcome, Cesar.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you, Gaia.
Thanks, Cesar. Now, very quickly, you and I have known each other for many years, and the Cesar that I initially met was very different to the Cesar that is in front of all of us today. And I wanted to have you on the channel because, to me, you have taken a giant leap of faith and embarked on quite a transformational journey that I think a lot of people really desire to do and dream of doing, but don't necessarily have the courage to do. And you actually went ahead and did it, which is amazing. Cesar, your journey starts with a plant medicine ceremony. Would it be possible for you to share who you were at the time, a little bit about the plant medicine ceremony, and then that pivotal message that you received in that journey?
Geez, that was just such a deep and powerful, pivotal journey in my life. What exactly would you like me to focus about it?
I'd like to just also for you to describe to people sort of who you were and where you were at the time, just work-wise, where you were living, all of that, and then the journey.
Perfect. Okay, great. So I was doing well in my business. I've had my marketing agency at this point it's going to be 11 years in October, and that was going well. I loved being an entrepreneur, setting my own schedule. So things were going well in that regard. Things were going well with my family as well through the transformational work that I've done, that I know you've done as well, and courses and stuff like that, particularly in Landmark. I developed much greater relationships with my family. Also, my friends, I had just the greatest community of friends. I always had like the best potlucks, the best game nights, the best parties in my condo in Midtown Miami, and on paper, like everything was great. You know, I had the life that I would have always wanted, and I was also involved in leadership in Landmark Education, or Landmark Worldwide, for those of you who are familiar. And I had spent actually 6 years training myself to lead programs. I was actually at the very end of an 18-month apprenticeship to learn to lead some of the bigger programs and be a program leader at Landmark. And even though everything was going great and it looked great on paper, I had spent about 6 months really grappling with this sense of the word that comes to mind is misery. You know, at the end of the day, throughout the week, when I'd be sitting there in the office and then picking up some of my other things to do, I was like, I don't know what's missing, but there's something missing. And yeah, when I would think about things I need to do, like it would just become such a drag. So that's where I was. That's where I was, not knowing exactly what it was. I would get coaching from some of my top mentors in the organization there. And long story short, the coaching was kind of like, oh, you got to remember why you're doing what you're doing. Right. So I was like, okay, sure. I'll create a possibility, or I'll get reconnected to my why. And that would work for about a week, you know, and then I'd end up right back there. So that's kind of where I was.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. And then that brought you to the moment of one of several plant medicine ceremonies that you'd done, right? Could you tell us a little bit about the actual ceremony and sort of the message that was communicated within it?
Yeah, I went into it a little bit differently than other ceremonies in the past, because coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, maybe by divine intervention, I had an Akashic record reading the day before. And one of the things that I took away from that was just like this discovery that there was just a pain within me that I hadn't allowed myself to feel. And that's why I'd become so rigid. That I already had that awareness going into it after that consultation with that woman. And And part of what my intention became for that plant medicine journey was to allow anything that I'd been suppressing to surface, any pain, and to just feel it and bring love and healing to it. So one of the mantras that I walked away from that consultation with that woman that she gave me was put one hand on your heart, one hand on the earth, and say, I don't want to understand, I want to heal. Because a lot of times when I went into plant medicine journey, I would see all this knowledge, all this information, and I was trying to like grasp it all and understand it, maybe even take it with me. And it's like I was figuring out how reality works, you know. She's like, don't do that. Don't try to understand. You know, just put one hand on your heart, one hand on the earth, and say, I don't want to understand. I want to heal. That's what the intention that I went into that journey with. And I definitely think it fulfilled.
There's a message in particular, I believe, within that journey that led you to where you are today. Can you speak a little bit into that?
Yeah, there were a few. So first of all, you know, I wrote down that little mantra on the top of my notes. I don't want to understand. I want to feel. I take the medicine in a beautiful setting. And I think it was about 15, no more than 20 minutes afterwards. I'm like, you know what? I should go to the bathroom real quick before this thing kicks in. And right there in the bathroom, I had just like this completely life-altering moment. You know, like I walked into the bathroom and basically saw the 4-year-old version of myself sitting there curled up crying. And in that realm where I was, because obviously medicine was already working, I just went and sat next to him. And I said, I'm sorry you've been here alone, that I've left you alone here crying this whole time. You don't have to be alone anymore. I'm here with you now, and I'll cry with you. And he looked up at me, and it was like this beautiful moment. I could feel like the pain as well. And then we just sat there for like 10 minutes crying. That alone kind of just opened something for me. And so that was one moment in that journey. And then I said to him, I'm like, hey, you know, I gotta go because I think other people need the bathroom, but I'll come back. So I left the bathroom. I requested the private room. So I went into this dark private room by myself. And then I had another like huge moment there. Would you like me to tell you about that one too?
Sure, yes, please.
So I basically went into a vision, right? And in that vision, what was happening was the course that I'd been training to lead, called the Landmark Forum, it was happening, right? Like 150 people sitting in chairs with a microphone in the front and a facilitator leader at the front. And the facilitator was talking to the person at the microphone. And a lot of times what happens is people are encouraged to like think back to find out where the originating incident happened, right? Where you got all screwed up kind of thing. That's how I would say it. Because we all have trauma, right? Developmental trauma, shock trauma or something, right? So in Landmark, they call it originating incidents. And people start thinking back, and then they're talking about it on the microphone, and everybody almost without fail has like that moment where like they touch a point of pain within their heart. And that's what happened in my vision. There was this woman, and she goes to that memory, and eventually she just starts choking up, right? Starts crying. So what happened differently in my vision than what would usually happen in that course setting is everything went dim. All of a sudden, everything's dark, and it was like there was a spotlight over her. And the moment she touched that pain, her body starts to collapse backwards. And she's the only one I can see there now in front of the microphone stand. And she was like falling in slow motion. And immediately, he's like about 6 men that look like shadows. They rush in with a sense of urgency, the way that doctors and nurses would rush to receive like an emergency patient into like the emergency room, like that, with a sense of urgency, and they catch her right as she was about to fall. And it was the most interesting thing. They're all just kind of holding her, like cradling her. She's crying, and everybody, all those 6 shadowy men, I could only see like their silhouettes. They're just like super intentionally holding space for her. And it was just like in their way of being, they were encouraging this woman to continue on in that process, releasing whatever she was releasing, feeling whatever she was feeling. And in that space, she was able to do so, right? She was able to release. And while that was going on, I'm just looking at this happening. One of the guys like peers up at me, like looks me right in the eye for like 1 or 2 seconds. And he was right back to doing what he was doing because it was so important what he was doing. So in those 2 seconds, it's almost like I received a transmission. And what I received was basically, this is very important. This is what's needed. This is what's missing. And I was just like, whoa. That's kind of where that ended. And in that moment, I probably felt the greatest calling I ever felt in my life, which was something I didn't have before. Maybe people talk about the moment they had a calling, and I just knew what my life was for. I never really had that till this moment. In that moment, I realized like, wow, like that is what's needed, right? And the coursework that we did in Landmark, and in my opinion, by the way, I love Landmark and it's super valuable. It's just not everything, right? It's one tool. And in my opinion, that with that one tool alone, you sell yourself short. And if you're really committed to doing what I would refer to as your inner work, right? Your inner healing. So, and why I would say that's because I think it's a bit up here in the brain, and that's what was missing for me. And in my opinion, what was missing for other people that I would see around me in that community is the heart. So, because in the coursework that we did, it was pretty much like a classroom environment, right? So somebody would go up to the microphone, say their thing, and that's not what would normally happen. They wouldn't collapse and people would hold them and then hold space for them for like an hour. No, like normally it's like, okay, well, invent a new possibility. What are you inspired to create? Amazing. Joy. All right, perfect. Everybody clap, sit down. Okay, who's next? Or you would go on, right? So in my experience, like there wasn't the depth, right? We wouldn't go to the depth that was necessary to go to really do the feeling and the healing necessary to like get those things from the past complete and break free from that. So it would be more like we would create a new inspiring thing on top of the pain, and we just know how it came to be, where it came from. We have an understanding of it, but we didn't really heal it, right? There's a book out there called Feel to Heal, from a breathwork practitioner. So anyway, that showed me like what my path was going to be next, at least for the next while, which was I got to do that for myself, right? Because I could see I've been missing for myself, and then maybe I might have a resource for other people, because I know I'm not the only one that has been missing this crucial step. So I wasn't attached to whether that would be some course or even a resource guide or a workshop. Like I don't even have to deliver it myself. I could just make a list of things that people could go do to like do that, right? So I didn't care what it was. I just wanted to maybe create something that I could provide for other people so that they can have that resource for themselves to do that deeper level of work.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for taking us into your journey with you. Now, Cesar, part of this journey that you went on led you from Miami to Costa Rica. How did that happen, and how did you trust the message and your intuition, despite having never really been there before?
Yeah, that was another thing we spoke a couple of days ago, right? We talked about like journeys into the unknown or something, right? Like that. That was definitely its own journey into the unknown. Going to Costa Rica, where I am now, have been for 2 years and 3 months, 4 months. Um, so this is why sometimes when I tell this whole story, I refer to it as divine intervention because I already had a plan to go to Costa Rica before this happened, before the Akashic record reading, before the ayahuasca ceremony the following day. And there was a friend that called me one time. She was like, "Hey, Cesar, I'm going to Costa Rica." And I was like, "Oh, shoot. Well, I want to come too." She's like, "Yeah, I thought I would move there for a month, maybe two." I was like, "Yeah, let's do that." And eventually she backed out. And I was like, "Well, I want to do it anyway." People were very much like in lockdown at this point in time. You know, when this idea was brewing up, this was like October, September, November of 2020. I had been to Cancun with an ex-girlfriend for 2 weeks in September. And I realized like, wow, this whole time I've had this fear of working remotely, but I actually had my most productive time in those 2 weeks in Cancun. So I was like, I need to do more of this. So when the Costa Rica idea came through, I just kind of trusted it. I was like, well, why not? And I definitely started seeing signs, by the way. It's just where it gets wild. So I had been to Costa Rica in 2009 when I was like in high school. And I just saw that I learned one of the mantras in Costa Rica is pura vida. Everything is pura vida, which means like pure life. So you ask somebody how they're doing and they're like pura vida, and like, hey, did you check my engine oil? Is it pura vida? It's everything's pura vida. It's used in so many different ways. And I don't know if it was before or after that ceremony that in 3 different instances I saw these signs pointing to Costa Rica. My friend Eli, I go over his house for lunch, and on top of his living room he had pura vida. I had this TV show I was watching with my sister. It was kind of like our thing called Blacklist. The guy's like, "Where's the suitcase? We need to find the suitcase." And the guy's like, "We found it. It's in Costa Rica." And I'm like, "This is crazy." And then, yeah, my friend saying Costa Rica, that was like, all right, I'm going to Costa Rica. When she backed out, though, I definitely had a moment of like meeting with myself and say, okay, am I still going to do this? And when I had said I would do it, it was my intention originally, this is before the ceremony, was to connect with the spiritual community down there and explore some off the grid, self-sufficient communities. But sure enough, after that ceremony, my main intention, even though the trip was already planned, became my own inner healing. I had heard about how Costa Rica is almost like a healing capital of the world, so I was like, I'm going to go and do that, spend some time on my own. So yeah, I went to Costa Rica, and that became a whole other container, a whole other retreat in and of itself, like a solo retreat.
Yeah, and Cesar, that's amazing. I mean, you took a really giant leap of faith, and I wanted to ask you, what did it feel like, sort of navigating a new country, a new culture, these new insights, this newfound purpose, and your own healing at the same time?
It felt quite beautiful. I think anybody, even if you don't have a reason for it, could benefit from just pulling yourself out of your environment that you're very familiar with and putting yourself in a completely different environment that you're not familiar with, because it gets you out of your routine and you're like rediscovering life. And in essence, you almost, without helping it, you end up like rediscovering yourself. It's something really beautiful when like there's not a single person that around you, because all of a sudden like your past is not with you, right? Like you introduce yourself to somebody and it's almost like, wow, like who am I that I'm going to introduce myself to this person as? So it was beautiful for that reason, because everything was new. And I wound up, by the way, in this tiny little beach town called Potrero. And I wound up there like super randomly. Like I had bookmarked 7 different Airbnbs, somewhat close to Nasara, because that was supposed to be like where the buzz was at. And I wound up like an hour and a half north of Nasara, half an hour north of Tamarindo. And there was like nobody there. There was no community. There were no expats. There were probably like maybe 3. And I would go try to meet people at restaurants, bars, wherever, and they were all empty. They were empty because people were still not living in their house. But what there was, which is probably what helped me maintain my sanity, was beautiful nature. The beaches there were just like stunning. So I developed a ritual for myself. Every single afternoon, I would go watch the sunset. That's all there was to do. Watch the sunset and go grocery shopping. I went to the grocery store way too much. And so instead, I would just go to the beach and I would just watch the sunset. And then I took to making campfires, making just like bonfires on the beach. And that became like my little ritual. And little did I know, like the depth of the process, the inner process that was happening just by me doing those rituals like every single day, you know, going there, meeting with the ocean, meeting with the sky, meeting with the stars, meeting with the departing sun, meeting with the sand, and meeting with the fire. I've come to learn a lot about the work that indigenous people would do with the fire, you know, and I didn't know this back then, but yeah, it's almost like I had like some sort of guidance. I definitely feel that the universe was guiding me. I wound up even having like conversations with the fire at one point, and I thought I was going maybe a little bit crazy, but I wasn't. It was like one of the best things that ever happened to me. And before I knew it, I entered this process of grief. Like I was sitting there by the fire in the darkness of the night, grieving something, and I wasn't too sure what it was. Eventually, I realized that I was grieving the old me that was the Cesar that got there, because it was not the Cesar that was going to come out of there. And that's what I was grieving.
Thank you so much for sharing that and your rituals and kind of bringing us into all of that. While you were in the middle of this whole healing process and this sort of very solitary process, I think another very interesting thing happened, and that your journey took a second interesting turn along the way. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
You mean a romantic turn?
Perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that we would have to fast forward quite a bit, right? Because, man, did the universe put me through like levels. It was like I got there and I was still like in first grade. You know, like those early weeks, I was trying to see like, who am I going to hook up with, you know? And funny enough, like I can remember 2 clear opportunities, they kind of just like disappeared. And I was like, wow, like in Miami, usually like this kind of worked out. It's not working here, you know? And yeah, it was like a reminder to bring my attention inward. And one time somebody joined me to sit by the fire, and I saw how much my body, like everything in my physiology, wanted to like just be all over that woman. I was trying to like cop a feel, maybe get close. And I had such keen awareness of everything that was going on in my psyche at this point that I caught myself, and I was like, wait a second, I don't even know this woman. Here I am like trying to like get something from her, you know, and that was kind of like an eye opener. You know, my guidance in that moment was get to know her first, you know, go figure. Like it sounds kind of obvious, right? But I think as men, like we get very conditioned in modern society that like, hey, part of your worth as a man is how much you can just conquer, quote unquote, like a woman, you know, and a lot of men, including myself, well, I don't think I ever just took it on as a numbers game, like, oh, let me go and sleep with as many women as possible. But with a lot of men, it is that way. Like, oh, there's a beautiful woman there. Let me go and try and sleep with her. So yeah, it was very sobering to now take on relating to that woman as a human being, not as an instrument for my sexual pleasure.
Mm.
And I definitely pumped the brakes, and that was like level like second grade, you know, from my little school retreat that was going on. If I skip a few grades, because there are definitely more, before I knew it, I was in this place where I felt full within my heart. After a breathwork session, I arrived in Costa Rica January 2021, February 2021. About a month later, I did this breathwork session that changed my life. I saw exactly what that pain was. I had a huge release, and it led me to take on celibacy because I saw how much I had disconnected from a sense of divinity in my own body. And I created a new intention. I was like, okay, I'm not gonna sleep with somebody again until it's from that place of divinity, right? That where I'm present to the divinity in my own body and I'm present to the divinity within her. And I realized like what I want to create in the world of romance with a woman is depth, you know, be able to explore a great depth. So that's when that intention got created. 6 months later, I declared my celibacy complete because I definitely experienced my shift. I used to have this voice that I was always trying to plot how am I going to get whatever attractive woman is around me, like in bed. Now that voice was gone and I felt full within myself. I realized that it was a seeking of validation, trying to find my sense of worth outside because I wasn't giving myself that love and nurturing that would have me feel whole and worthy within myself. So once that had completely shifted, it was beautiful. I declared my celibacy complete 6 months later. And even though I was in this town where there's just like the most beautiful women everywhere, this beach town called Santa Teresa, still like I was so full within my heart that I was okay with like, okay, no, I don't need that actually, you know. I'm going to continue to just hold space for a partner with whom I'm going to experience that depth. So eventually she showed up. Her name is Ilana. She's my fiance now. And she's the best. She's, you know, so that I hope I answered your question.
I've had the absolute honor of meeting her too, and I would have to agree with you. And I also want to say thank you for just, you know, sharing what you shared so openly just now about, you know, sexuality, males, females, celibacy, you know, holding out for in-depth relationships. I think there's a lot of very profound messages in that. Thank you for that. And tell us a little bit about Ilana and how you guys met and the relationship.
Sure. So it's interesting because when I first met her, she was actually in a relationship with a guy who became my housemate. Right? She was going to move into the house with him, and then she didn't. And he was a friend of mine that I'd met, so he's like, "Hey, there's a room available if you're looking for a place." And I was like, "I am." So I moved in. So I was housemates with him, and she'd come visit him, you know, and like it was 100% platonic. Eventually, things didn't work out between them, and I still wasn't sure if they were kind of like in a gray area, so I still kept my distance. But still, it was completely platonic. It wasn't even in my radar, you know. In fact, there was a few like paradigm shifts that I had to have to even begin to see her and me as a match. You know, I used to say things to myself like, "Oh, she's too pure for me. She's like this angel walking the earth," you know, and I'm just like this dude from Miami. So yeah, we just got along as friends. At one point, I did ask her like, "Hey, when's the last time you talked to this guy?" And she's like, "Oh, I haven't talked to him like in a month." And that's when I was like, "Oh wow, okay." And when we went on this friends excursion kind of thing, like 9 of us, like that's when we had our first magnetic pull. But I still wasn't sure. I was like, "Oh, I don't know what to do about this. Is that just what happens to me and the beautiful woman, or is there something special here? I don't know." And then we had there was an ecstatic dance that my friend Darren was DJing, and her and I I approached her to do contact dance, right? So I had taken like 3 lessons of contact dance. If you haven't done contact dance, I highly recommend it. It's the greatest practice to discover boundaries and dance around boundaries and how to express boundaries. So anyway, and it's beautiful because it's just full presence with another, and we do this beautiful contact dance, and the music starts to end, and there's usually like a sound journey that happens after. When you do contact dance, part of the premise is you don't break the contact until you're done, right? But the music ended and we still didn't break the contact. We went into this sound journey. So she was like laying down and I was holding the back of her head, like on my lap. And I could just really feel something special. After the dance was done, another friend of ours, this woman, actually, I just met her that day. She approached us. She was a stranger at that point. She was like, wow, that dance that you did with that woman, it was so beautiful. It made me cry. Thank you for touching my heart. And I was just like, whoa, what did we do? But yeah, it was deep and beautiful, So that's kind of when the pull started even greater. And I was still running this program in my head, like, I don't know, I think I'm like too much of a jerk for her, because I really wanted the best for her. At this point, I had such great respect for her. And thankfully, I was actually doing authentic relating, of course, 1 and 2. And in between, and it's one weekend and the next weekend. Between those weekends, I spoke to a couple of people and they're like, who's this jerk that you're referring to? Like, we don't ever see him. I was like, oh, wow, maybe I'm relating to myself as like a very old version of myself. And then I did a meditation and I journaled afterwards, and it hit me. I'm like, holy shit. I am the person that I've been doing all that work trying to transform into. I'm no longer some asshole, jerk, arrogant. I'm someone who's kind, gentle, caring. That's who I really am. And maybe we would be a good match, and yeah, when I settled that for myself, I was like, okay, I'm going for it. And she came to visit where Darren and I were staying for about a week, between the authentic relating courses. And I set up secretly this playlist where I was going to do another contact dance with her in the Maloka, actually, where they usually did the ayahuasca ceremonies, in this retreat center. At the end of the night, I was like, hey, do you want to go check out the Maloka? She's like, yeah. And I take my playlist and the Bluetooth speaker already on, So as soon as we get there, I had already swept it too, because I hadn't been used in years. So I swept the whole thing secretly. And I play the music and I'm like, do you want to dance? She's like, yes. And we have another beautiful dance. We end up having our first kiss there. And that's when like the doors just open to this whole new connection. And and I'll include this too, while it might be a bit vulnerable, but it's part of the beauty of it, was at the end of the night, we were staying at this retreat center that has different cabins. Darren and I were staying in one cabin. Her and her friend, Annabelle, were staying in another cabin. Annabelle was in a romantic connection with Darren at this point. So they actually started the same day. They also had their first kiss that same night. I walk Alana to her cabin, and I was so determined to like come from a new place, not from the old Cesar place, that I stopped at the front of her door and I said, okay, well, have a beautiful night. And I was just going to leave her there, And so I walked back. Funny enough, I see Annabelle sandals there in my cabin, I was like, oh, shoot. But I was like, no, it's okay. I was like, should I go back? I said, no. And then the following night, I spent it in her cabin, but still like withholding any kind of sexual connection till I felt like absolutely right, which wasn't until about a month and a half later. This second night, I remember just laying on her chest, and I could hear her heartbeat right before we were about to go to sleep, and I got teary-eyed in that moment. And that's when I was just like, wow. Like there's something really special about this woman, So that's how it started. And I guess most of the rest is history. There was a big development after that too.
That's amazing. It sounds absolutely heartwarming and deep and connected and just like the start of a beautiful relationship. And knowing you from before, I know that that's a huge transformation in and of itself for you. So amazing. Now, I know we're skipping over a lot of other pretty large chunks in the relationship and the evolution of this journey, but then your journey took a third turn that was
Yes.
pretty
Yes.
interesting and pivotal as far as transformation goes. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, like if there hadn't been already like super deep and challenging kind of evolutions already, the biggest one came 3 months into our relationship when we surprisingly got pregnant. And boy, oh boy, was that just the beginning of a whole new journey, a whole new process. Yeah. Funny enough, we had spoken about it briefly, like, oh, what would we do if we were to accidentally get pregnant? And we both agreed that we would keep the baby. So when she told me that we were pregnant, I was like, okay, I guess we're doing this, you know. Looking back, I do think it would have been good to like re-have the conversation, if that's a word, to be fully in it. I think we kind of were both like maybe feeling like, okay, we talked about it, so we shouldn't go back on our word. But yeah, no, I mean, it's good to like just have both feet in, you know. So having that conversation again would probably maybe help the process a bit. And geez, the I think part of what made it challenging for me was that it was a very new relationship still. It had mostly been long distance at this point. It'd only been 4 months by the time we discovered we were pregnant. And at that point, I just moved in with her. And I was wanting to like connect with her deeply, like strengthen the relationship, create more of a foundation, get to know each other more. And she was having a very difficult process in her body. Like the pregnancy hit her really hard. She was pretty much bedridden, nauseous, like she was like on a seasick on a boat all day. That's how it was for like 3 months. So I would bring her breakfast in bed, and it made it very challenging for us to connect. Yeah, this was like another evolution that now I guess I was being called into that I didn't really realize at the time. In fact, I went back to that Akashic record reader, and I shared with her what I was struggling with, which I'll tell you now what I was struggling with. I was still feeling like a lot of sexual desire, you know, and I realized that at this point, like I had done the work to connect my heart center with my pelvic center, and it was just like when I opened my heart, I also opened my pelvic center, to put it that way, I guess. So the desire was huge, and she was just not available for that. You know, like if you touch her, she would throw up. You know, so I was having a really hard time, and I couldn't help but ask myself, like, man, am I doing some seeking of validation through sexual approval from my partner? Am I still trying to get something from her? Or is this normal? You know, and that's what I asked the psychic. I was like, is this just a normal human desire? Or am I like still from a place of shadow trying to seek approval and validation by way of her sexual disposition? And she answered the question in this way. She said, what there is for you to do is to learn to be a father.
Wow.
So she answered her own question, not mine. And it took me over a year to wrap my mind around her answer.
Yeah.
You know, when I feel into my body now, and when it comes to being in the relationship and being around her, it's a completely different experience. I'm like a different person than who I was then at the beginning of that pregnancy. And when I talk to, especially some of my guy friends about it, I tell them like, look, I don't know. This is something that I should be really proud of. or really sad about?
Mm,
And I think it's actually a little
interesting
bit of both.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like one of those things, right? Where and having all that sexual energy and abundance of it is just is just um beautiful to be able to dance in that, to be able to experience that, to indulge in that, right? So there's a beauty to that. And then having to distance yourself away, well, distance myself away from that, like that was one of the hardest things I ever did in my life, you know. um for the time being, at least, I had to just kind of grieve that too, and eventually got to this place where like, okay, I'm okay now, you know.
Mm,
So it was like, again, there's layers to this whole process, right? So this was a whole new layer where I really had to learn to hold myself, hold my own heart, and just give myself whatever love I was wanting from her, you know. So I've described this whole process in different ways between now and then, as, and I guess I keep getting more and more insight about it in retrospect, right, in hindsight. Um, and the last time I spoke to Alana about it, I see it as, whereas before I kind of described it as like one of the hardest things I had to go through, almost with a sense of like, um, at some point there was a sense of resentment. Even now, I see it as probably the greatest gift I ever got, because I think that that was the process of me becoming a father.
incredible.
Yeah,
Beautiful, Caesar. And it sounds almost like, one of the biggest rites of passage in life in general.
yeah,
And I wanted to ask you about fatherhood, because I mean that brings its own huge set of responsibilities and challenges and insights. And how has that been for you, and how has it, changed your perspective on life and your way of being and being in partnership and all of that? Because I know, like every couple, it's not always amazing.
hmm hmm yeah. It's definitely not always rosy. I tell people like, hey, don't rush to become parents. Like, enjoy where you're at, because once you move on from that and you go on to be a parent, like there's no refunds, you know, like there's no sending it back, you know. So both stages are beautiful, you know. Being single is beautiful, being in a relationship without a child is beautiful, because you have all this time, the spaciousness to explore things and do things together. And then being a parent is beautiful, you know. So just enjoying wherever you're at is really the key. Like I said before, I think the process of pregnancy definitely prepared me a lot, because I guess I didn't name it, and maybe I did it on purpose because it's such a difficult thing to name. But if I were to name it, I would call it selflessness, and that's something that my own father probably embodied more than any man I ever met. My dad is the most selfless human being on earth. He, like, his whole life is about like making sure that all his kids change their oil in their car, and making sure that the house looks the way it needs to look. My mom loves to keep the house super nice, so he's like always like working on it. And he and look, maybe he does it to a fault, right? Sometimes I'm like, Dad, like, what would you like to do? You know, and his brain doesn't even go there very much, you know. So yeah, that there is obviously there's a balance of it, but that is the biggest thing that I think is necessary, and that's what I developed in that process, where like there was this desire that I had, that Cesar had, you know, and but there was a greater thing going on, which was like, okay, we're holding space for this arrival of a new human, of a new being, and she's the one that's channeling it all, you know. So like literally, the incubator is her body, and that's what it's about right now, you know. So that process of putting yourself like on that back burner or lower on the shelf is tough, and especially if you didn't have much guidance or preparation, you know. Like I wish there was like, I don't know, like dad school or something. Maybe there is, and I never heard about it. But I looked to see if I connect with other guys, but I didn't really find the best guidance. Yeah, no. So my point is, I think pregnancy prepared me a lot. So by the time the baby arrived, I was quite ready. I was just like, okay, let's take care of both of them now. Had maybe the pendulum swing a bit too far too, because now, while we were pregnant, in terms of the relationship, maybe I didn't deal with it in the best way, but the best way that I found to deal with it at one point was to kind of just disconnect myself and just be there as a space holder, as a provider, making sure there's everything that's needed, everything, that there's safety, and that was it. And not so much perhaps connection from the heart. So at some point, like I think when Luca, our baby, was 2 months old, that's when she approached me and said, like, hey, like, I feel like we're so disconnected. And I'm like, well, yeah, I've been feeling that for a while. So that was actually good news for me, because it told me, wow, she's ready to like now nourish our own connection, our own relationship now again. And we started doing that. And now things are quite beautiful. That's definitely shifted. The attachment was what I needed to learn to let go of. The attachment to things being a certain way, the relationship being rosy, me getting all the sex that I want, her showing up however I wanted her to show up, like just like releasing all of that attachment. It was hard. It was hard because there was a part of me that said, like, hey, if I release all that, like, why am I even in the relationship? Right? If I'm not going to connect from the heart, if I'm not going to, I don't know, feel like I'm seen, feel like I'm loved, like, why am I still here? So it's quite a mind fuck, So yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest superpower of a father, I think, is just like the staying power, just stay regardless, and then hopefully things turn out better in the future, and they have, which is the nice thing.
Yeah. And Cesar, I'm listening to you and I'm learning so much just about relationships and insights into them and connections and kind of rediscovering yourselves. And I feel like you're already leaving such a huge legacy for Luca, your child. And, I mean, there's such important messages for a child to learn early on and to have during their development. But I wanted to ask you personally, what legacy do you feel that you're leaving for your child?
To take care of his own heart, connect with his heart, and live from the heart.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of heart, I feel like you've successfully found your way into your own heart and into the heart of others. And I feel a lot of people don't necessarily have that ability or that capacity yet. And I know it's what, to a certain degree, led you to starting a men's group there in Costa Rica, which I think is hugely, hugely valuable. Would you mind telling us a little bit about the men's group? Because I think it's such an important step towards, fostering not only personal growth, but also community support and community development.
Yeah. The first men's group I started was actually online. I was in Europe. We were visiting her mother when we were pregnant. And funny enough, even though it came from a desire to get back to doing the work with others, really who needed it the most, probably me at that time. That was very helpful. I didn't find a dad group, but I created a men's group, and that was amazing. I think this month is 1 year that we've been meeting twice a month with those guys online. We have like 16 guys that show up quite consistently on our hour and a half gatherings online. And eventually, when I settled back here, maybe 7 months ago now, I started a men's circle here in Costa Rica as well. And that's thriving now. We just had 10 people last week. And And yeah, and it's been beautiful to connect with other men and just do the work together, you know. So it was this beautiful thing where I had a lot of experience being a coach through Landmark and worked with a lot of people to do some really deep work. And I took a year and a half, almost two, off to do my own process. And before I knew it, the guys that I was connecting with, they were like, man, I'm struggling with this, struggling with that. And I was like, all right, look, why don't we hop on a call and talk about it? Because I think I'm familiar with that process. And then coaching kind of found me again, you know. So yeah, now I have the fortune to work with other men to do the sacred work, the deepest work, you know, and it's been really beautiful. Even though these guys have lots of training, by the way, because I worked with these guys who are like just high caliber, you know, like you and I, they've done all kinds of coursework. Um, and yet, you know, I've worked with a guy who like didn't have sex with his wife for a year and a half, you know, and it just became a taboo. So we did the work, and 4 weeks in, like they're having great sex again, you know, and that's just such an important part of the relationship. I mean, the sexual dynamic, in a way, it's almost like the arena where you get to see all the subtleties of your own psyche in relationship to another, you know. So like your shadows are there, your inauthenticities, your truths, you know, like that's the arena, you know. So like you gotta enter the arena, you know. So yeah, sexuality is one pillar of it, but yeah, there's so many other things that we need to pay attention to in when we're doing our men's work. So yeah, it's beautiful to get to do this work with other guys.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I would have to agree with you that it is absolutely sacred work. And
Mm-hmm.
it gives me so much joy to see you stepping into this sacred work and to being this sort of support for other men in general. And I know that this led you to develop a course too.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love you to, first of all, share the name of the course, because I tell you, when I heard it, it gave me goosebumps, because
Mm-hmm.
it's so about your journey and it's so about transformation, and it's such a powerful name. And I'd
Mm.
love you to share the name and just a little bit about the course.
Yes, it's a long time coming. I'm very excited about it. When the men's circle came around, there was guys that wanted to participate, so I created a brand for it. The brand is Conscious Masculinity, and there's an application for that for people that want to join a men's circle. It's absolutely free. I value that it's free as well. I don't know it'll be free forever, but right now it is. And as I've done the work with other guys and I reflect back into my own journey, I mean, I feel like it's my life's work, because it's so tied to what I experience myself and also what I see guys dealing with, which is mostly the seeking of something outside of you, you know, that comes from a mother wound or a father wound. So we I packed it all into a 10-week course, and it's called Initiation, Conscious Masculinity Initiation, right? So the I love that name too, because you know, if you've read anything in the realm of men's work, you realize that there actually used to be initiations into manhood, right, into the mature masculine, that we've lost. And that's something that I left out that actually came to me also in that same ayahuasca ceremony, where a spirit told me your civilization has lost the rite of passage, and that's why your men are weak and leadership is lacking, and you have forgotten how to honor your divine feminine and your mothers, you know. So we get very conditioned out of the femininity in our own bodies, in our own selves. We get told like, oh, don't do that, that's gay, that's being girly, you know, don't cry, all this stuff. But that's just one aspect of it, right? Like not being in touch with our own emotions, not being able to be vulnerable. The other aspect of it too is going too much into power, right? Using power to feel important, right? So there's a dichotomy there, and we could go on and on. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but the long story short is that the whole process of achieving that masculine sovereignty, where you learn to resource yourself and you find everything that you need within you so that you can show up as who you're committed to be in life, which perhaps is someone who's kind, someone who leaves people with their love for them, not anything else. Someone who can bring leadership and be a space holder, even when things are wild, especially in your relationship, when your woman is saying all kinds of outlandish things because she's upset, where you're able to just hold space there without bringing anything but love to it. That's the journey that I call initiation.
Amazing. Absolutely inspiring. Thank you,
Yeah.
Cesar.
Yeah, I mean, in short, what I tell people the course is about is to connect with a deep softness and strength of the heart, embrace the power of the mature masculine, and realign your life with your soul purpose.
Incredible. Powerful words.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I wanted to ask you, you've been on quite the journey, and I've had the honor and privilege of participating in most of this journey. And, you know, it's been a journey through plant medicines, through moving countries, fatherhood, being in partnership, self-development, coaching, all sorts of things along the way. And I wanted to ask you, if you had to look back now and give some advice or suggestions to someone else who was newly embarking on this journey of, you know, a journey of self-discovery to find themselves, what sort of advice or wisdom could you give them?
Probably two. One would be go to your pain, right? Feel your pain. And number two would be face your fears. I think you and I share a favorite quote, which is the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. I think it's Joseph Campbell, right? So that's really it. I mean, society, I mean, when we were very tiny, right? 2 years old, 3 years old, like we get conditioned to put walls up. Oh, that doesn't feel good. So I'm going to protect myself from it. So that way I don't have to heart, right? And by doing that, you blocked yourself out from your soul. You block yourself out from your greatest joy. You block yourself out from the depth of your emotion, right? Your ability to fully experience and be better penetrated by the moment, which is all we got, right? So you got to break down those walls. And you do that by going to your fear, sitting with it, going to your pain, holding space for it, feeling it, and letting it move through you versus trying to block it.
100%. And walking willingly into the cave instead of trying to go somewhere else.
Instead of waiting for life to knock your ass out into it, you know, like it's going to happen sooner or later. And if you don't do it in this life, you're going to have to do it in the next life, maybe. 100%. You believe in reincarnation. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Cesar. And question, are there any books or videos or, you know, important reading that you've come across that has been life-changing to you or has had an important message for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, since we've been talking about, there's tons, but since we've been talking about men's work, one of the main ones that comes to mind is Iron John by Robert Bly. That probably is the book when it comes to masculinity and mature masculine and masculine initiation, right? He says this beautiful thing, you know, which is that birds keep the instincts and instinctual knowledge on how to be a bird through the instinctual system. Like they can pass it on biologically to the baby bird, and then the baby bird like have that in their body they know how to perform a mating dance, you know, they know how to create a nest. They didn't have to go to watch a YouTube video. They just have it in their instincts, you know. And he says, you know, the human being is such a dynamic creature, and there's such a commitment to freedom within humans that we couldn't store that in our own bodies because that would be some sort of programming, right? And humans, we don't like that. So instead, we stored that knowledge in stories, right? So the knowledge on how to be a man, right? Perhaps also how to be a woman. We don't store that in the instinctual system. We store that in stories, and we've lost our stories. Our mythology is hurting, right? So Iron John is actually one of those old mythologies. There's lots of richness in Greek mythology, which we don't go into in school. We just learn the stories themselves, but there's so much meaning behind them. Right? Like Zeus energy, for example, is that divine masculine energy. So he says Iron John is not a novel that he wrote. That's actually the myth that illustrates the journey of initiation and embracing the mature masculine. So I definitely would recommend that to men that are interested in this work. And the other one that I'll recommend is a beautiful book that my ex-girlfriend Gabby gave me. It's called The Journey Home. Such a beautiful book because it's also a similar journey to the heart. It's good for men and women. Very beautiful book.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing those. And we'll put links for those in the bottom.
Yeah.
Cesar, one final question to wrap up. If you had one overarching message to the world, what would it be?
Learn to love yourself. Learn to love yourself so that you can learn to love others and inspire others to love each other as well.
Got it. Beautiful.
And when I say to learn to love yourself, it's kind of cliche, right? Love yourself. No, I mean all of yourself. Even those things that you see in the mirror, those things that you carry, learn to love those things, have compassion for them. That would be it.
Thank you. Beautiful message and very much taken to heart. And I would like to take a moment to acknowledge you, Cesar. It's very interesting because we know each other and we've known each other for years. All right. And I have to say that spending this 1 hour with you, I have learned so much from you that I didn't know myself because, we've connected in different contexts, in masterminds, in Landmark, in Toastmasters, in all different contexts. And there's been snippets of the message in between, right? And so I cannot even tell you what a gift it has been for me to spend this one-on-one together, completely uninterrupted, to just be together and to kind of look at our own journeys. And what I find even more interesting is